Families are supposed to be built on love, respect, and trust. But sometimes, the people closest to us are the very ones who test those bonds the hardest. This is a story about Frank Dalton, a widowed father living quietly in his late 60s, and his complicated relationship with his only son, Ethan. 3 years of silence stood between them, until one day, on Frank's 68th birthday, a package arrived at his door. Inside was a beautiful, expensive bottle of whiskey, the kind meant for celebrations. Yet, it was no ordinary gift. Frank hadn't touched alcohol since his heart condition nearly claimed his life, and Ethan knew that. So why would his son send him something he could never use? Believing it was better placed in someone else's hands, Frank gave the bottle to his son-in-law's father, Robert Carson, a man known for his generosity and loyalty. But what seemed like a simple act of kindness soon spiraled into a nightmare of betrayal, suspicion, and dark secrets that would tear open old wounds and force a father to confront the unthinkable truth about his own child. Frank Dalton's mornings were always the same. At 68, routine was his strongest anchor. He woke before dawn, brewed a pot of black coffee, and sat by the kitchen table as the house slowly warmed with light. The old farmhouse creaked around him, every groan of wood and tick of the clock reminding him he was alone. It hadn't always been this way. Once, this same kitchen had been filled with laughter, his wife Linda humming as she stirred soup, their son Ethan charging in from the yard with mud on his shoes, complaining about chores. Those days felt like a different lifetime, one that ended the moment Linda's heart gave out and Ethan began pulling away. Frank had worked hard his whole life. 20 years in the service, then decades fixing fences, hauling lumber, and repairing whatever broke in their small town. He'd never had much, but he'd provided for his family. A solid roof, food on the table, and enough love to fill the gaps money couldn't mar. He expected that one day, when he slowed down, his son would be there to keep him company, to remember those sacrifices. Instead, silence had taken Ethan's place. It started gradually. Missed Sunday dinners, excuses about work, then skipped holidays. By the second Christmas, Frank realized his only child had stopped calling altogether. Not a word, not a visit. 3 years passed without even a knock at the door. Still, Frank kept a kind of faith. He told himself Ethan was busy, maybe overwhelmed by the weight of adulthood. He didn't let himself admit the truth. Ethan had chosen distance. Robert Carson, his daughter-in-law's father, filled some of that void. Robert was the kind of man you could count on without asking. When a storm tore shingles from Frank's roof, Robert arrived at dawn with a ladder and a hammer. When Frank's truck broke down, Robert lent him his without hesitation. He wasn't family by blood, but sometimes blood doesn't mean much. Robert often said, "A man's worth isn't measured by what he leaves his children, but by how he treats his neighbors." Frank believed that. He lived it. Yet somehow, his own son didn't see it the same way. The neighbors whispered that Ethan had grown greedy, that he married into money and thought himself too good for the simple life his father had built. Frank never spoke ill of him, though the words burned his throat sometimes. All he'd say was, "Ethan's figuring things out." A father's duty, he thought, was to protect his son's name, even when the son did little to protect his father's heart. The unfairness of it weighed on him. He remembered the hospital bed after his heart attack, Ethan sitting in the corner, scrolling on his phone, barely looking up when the doctor warned Frank against alcohol. The words had been clear. One more drink could mean the end. Ethan heard it. He knew it. Yet he never asked how Frank was coping, never checked in during recovery. It was as if his father's struggles were an inconvenience he preferred to ignore. Frank's only solace came from small acts of kindness from others, Robert's loyalty, the occasional visit from Linda Carson with her warm casseroles, even a wave from neighbors as he tended his yard. But deep down, he longed for Ethan. For a phone call. For a word that he still mattered. So when the package arrived on his 68th birthday, wrapped neatly with a short card that read only Happy Birthday in Ethan's familiar handwriting, Frank's chest tightened. It should have been joy, relief, proof that his son hadn't forgotten him. But instead, it felt heavy, like a stone pressing against an old wound. 3 years of silence, and this two words, no signature, and a bottle of whiskey. Frank stared at it for a long time. The label gleamed with gold lettering, the kind of bottle worth hundreds. Ethan had never been generous with money before. Why now? And why whiskey, of all things? His son knew better. He knew the risk. Frank sighed, setting it aside. He hadn't touched alcohol since his heart attack, not even a sip. Linda would have been proud of that. No matter how beautiful the bottle looked, it wasn't for him. Instead, his thoughts turned to Robert. A man who deserved something fine, a man who had stood by him without asking anything in return. Frank imagined Robert opening the bottle, sharing it with friends, laughing in that deep voice that carried across a room. That seemed better than letting it collect dust on his shelf. Later that day, Frank buckled the whiskey into the passenger seat of his old Chevy, a silly habit, but one that made him feel responsible. The sun was setting as he drove toward Robert's house, the fields glowing amber under the October sky. Robert opened the door in his usual flannel, sawdust on his boots. His eyes lit up at the sight of the bottle. "Frank, what's this?" "A gift," Frank said, handing it over. "From Ethan. Figured you'd enjoy it more than I would." Robert turned it in his hands, whistling softly. "This is something, Frank. The kind of bottle you save for a special night." "Then make tonight special," Frank replied with a faint smile. Robert's grin widened. "I think I will. Thank you." As Frank drove home, he thought about Ethan again, about the strange choice of gift, about the card that felt more like a stranger's note than a son's love. Something in his gut twisted, but he pushed it aside. Not everything needs a reason, he told himself. Yet deep down, he knew silence doesn't last 3 years without a reason. And sometimes, a gift isn't really a gift at all. Robert Carson's home was always full of warmth, the kind that didn't come from fireplaces or lamps but from the people inside. Linda Carson, his wife, greeted Frank with her usual smile, ushering him toward the living room where the faint smell of roasted chicken lingered. Frank didn't stay long that evening, but he felt lighter as he left. Robert had insisted he stay for dinner, but Frank declined, saying he had a pot roast waiting at home. Truth was, he hadn't cooked anything. He just didn't want to intrude. That night, the farmhouse felt quieter than usual. The whiskey's absence from his kitchen should have left him at peace, but instead, his thoughts circled it. Why would Ethan send it? Why now? He replayed their last real memory together, Ethan at the hospital after Frank's heart attack. The doctor had listed out restrictions. No alcohol, no red meat, no more working himself into exhaustion. Frank remembered looking at his son, hoping for reassurance, but Ethan's attention had been on his phone, fingers moving quickly over the screen. He had muttered something like, "Got it," but the words had carried no weight. That memory returned now, unwelcome. Ethan knew. He had known all along. The next morning, Frank tried to push the thoughts aside with small tasks. He read the newspaper, mended a loose board on the porch, and made coffee that grew cold before he touched it. Still, unease gnawed at him. The bottle had felt too heavy, too deliberate. By noon, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code was local. "Mr. Dalton?" The voice was tight, hurried. "This is Linda Carson, Robert's wife." Frank straightened in his chair. "Yes, Linda. Is everything all right?" Her breath hitched. "Robert collapsed this morning. He's in the hospital. They think it might be poisoning." The word dropped like lead into Frank's stomach. "Poisoning? That can't be right. He was fine last night." "They're running tests," she said, her voice breaking. "He had a drink with dinner, just one glass of that whiskey you brought over." Frank's hand trembled against the receiver. His eyes darted to the empty spot on his kitchen table where the bottle had been. The whiskey, he repeated slowly. Yes, the doctors said they'll look into it. I'll come to the hospital, Frank said, already reaching for his coat. When he arrived at St. Luke's, the fluorescent lights painted everything pale. Robert lay unconscious in a bed, wires attached to his chest, machines ticking and beeping in steady rhythm. Linda sat beside him, her hands clasped, eyes red from crying. Frank, she whispered, standing. I'm glad you came. Frank placed a hand on her shoulder. How is he? They're trying to stabilize his heart, she said. They found signs of toxins in his blood. Something unnatural. Frank's chest tightened. He wanted to deny it, to say it couldn't be the whiskey. But the truth pressed heavy against his ribs. He had given Robert that bottle. He had put it in his hands. When the doctor entered, he confirmed what Frank feared. We're seeing traces of plant-based toxins. We need to identify the exact source. Frank swallowed hard. His voice was low, almost ashamed. Doctor. I gave him a new bottle of whiskey yesterday. It was unopened. A gift. He had a glass last night. The doctor's expression didn't change, but his pen moved quickly. We'll need a sample of that bottle if it's available. Frank nodded. There's some left at his house. I'll get it. Back in the farmhouse, Frank searched the kitchen until he found a mason jar with a splash of amber liquid left over from the pour Robert had taken before setting the bottle aside. Next to it in the trash bin, something caught his eye. A small white vial, plastic, faint powder clinging to the inside. No label. He didn't remember throwing it away. His breath quickened. His heart pounded harder than it should have. That wasn't trash. That was evidence. He wrapped the mason jar in a paper bag, the vial beside it, and drove to see Gary, an old friend who ran a veterinary lab on the edge of town. Gary owed him a favor, and Frank wasn't above calling it in. I need you to test something, Frank said, his voice unsteady. Gary raised a brow. Whiskey? And maybe something else, Frank added. Gary didn't press for details, just took the bag and disappeared into his lab. Frank sat in the truck, staring at the fading light, his thoughts circling back to Ethan. Ethan had sent the bottle. Ethan had asked if Frank had tried it. Ethan had gone silent when Frank said he'd given it to Robert. By the next afternoon, Gary called back. His voice was grave. Frank, you're not going to like this. There's something in the whiskey. White snakeroot. In the right dose, it can stop a man's heart. Frank's hand gripped the phone tighter. His body felt cold, though sweat formed at his temples. Robert drank this. You didn't, did you? Gary asked. No, Frank whispered. Then you might have just dodged a bullet. Frank hung up and sat in silence. His son hadn't sent him a gift. He'd sent him a weapon. But why? Why would Ethan, his only child, do such a thing? The questions circled like vultures. He couldn't ignore them anymore. He couldn't pretend this was just a bad dream. The truth was there, sharp and unrelenting. Someone had wanted him dead, and that someone had signed the gift in handwriting Frank knew too well. Frank didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, drawing 2 columns in neat handwriting. What I know. Ethan sent the bottle. Ethan knew I no longer drink. Robert collapsed after drinking from it. Gary confirmed poison. White snakeroot. Strange vial found in my trash. What I can prove. Gary's test results. Mason jar with leftover whiskey. Phone call with Ethan. His odd reaction. The 2 columns mocked him. Knowledge without proof was just suspicion. Proof without courage was useless. At dawn, he picked up the phone and called his son. Hello? Ethan's voice was smooth, casual, too casual. It's me, Frank said. We need to talk. A pause. About what? You know damn well about what. The whiskey. Another pause. Then Ethan chuckled, low and dismissive. What about it? Did you finally try it? No, Frank said sharply. I gave it to Robert. He's in the hospital now, poisoned. Silence. Heavy, deliberate. Then Ethan's tone shifted, cooler. You gave it to Robert? Yes. He's fighting for his life. A long exhale came through the line. Huh. Then the call ended. Frank stared at the dead receiver, his hand trembling. That wasn't shock. That was calculation. Later that morning, Linda Carson called with an update. Robert was stabilized but still weak. Doctors suspected plant toxins but needed confirmation. Frank promised to bring them a sample from the jar. He drove into town with the mason jar in a paper bag, but something gnawed at him. When he stopped for gas, he checked the bag again. The jar was still there, but the vial he'd found in the trash gone. His pulse quickened. Someone had been in his house. Someone had taken the one piece of evidence that tied this directly to Ethan. Back home, he searched the doors, the windows, the locks. Nothing broken, nothing forced. Whoever had entered had done so with a key. Frank's chest tightened. Ethan had once had a set of keys after Frank's heart attack. Had he ever given them back? The thought made him dizzy. His own son, using his own keys, against him. That evening, he drove to Ethan's house. The neighborhood was new, full of tidy lawns and cookie-cutter homes that looked more like displays than dwellings. Ethan's truck sat polished in the driveway. When Ethan opened the door, his face flickered between surprise, annoyance, and a practiced smile. "Dad," he said warmly. "This is unexpected." "Is it?" Frank replied, stepping inside without asking. The house smelled of lemon polish and artificial air freshener. Everything was arranged neatly, no sign of life except for a row of expensive whiskeys on the counter. Not the poisoned bottle. Those were untouched. "I heard about Robert," Ethan said, closing the door. "Scary stuff. I hope he pulls through." "They think it's poison," Frank said flatly. Ethan's eyes narrowed just slightly. "That's what they're saying." "That's what the tests show," Frank replied. Ethan leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "So why are you here, Dad? To accuse me of something?" Frank took a step closer. "Did you tamper with that bottle?" The silence that followed stretched thin. The hum of the fridge, the tick of the wall clock, a car passing outside. Ethan's eyes didn't waver, but his mouth pressed into a line. Frank shook his head. "I don't need your answer. The silence is enough." "Careful," Ethan said finally, his voice low. "You keep accusing me of things. You'll push me away for good." Frank's heart sank at the cruelty in his tone. "Push you away? Son, you've been gone for years." When Frank returned home, the house felt darker. He wrote down every word of their exchange in his notes, then locked them in a fireproof box with the mason jar. He called Gary again, voice low. "It's gone," Frank said. "The vial. Someone took it." Gary swore under his breath. "You need the police involved." "I know," Frank said. "But I need more proof." The next day, as Frank sat at Robert's hospital bedside, Linda tried to reassure him. "This isn't your fault, Frank. You couldn't have known." But guilt weighed heavy. He had delivered the bottle. His own son had placed the poison in his hands, and he had passed it to a friend. Robert, pale but conscious, squeezed Frank's forearm. "You think Ethan did this?" Frank hesitated, then nodded. "I think the bottle wasn't a gift." Robert studied him, eyes steady. "Then you'd better be sure, because once you say it out loud, there's no taking it back." Frank knew he was right. Accusing your only child of attempted murder wasn't something you could undo. But the truth was already clawing its way out. That night, as Frank prepared for bed, a car idled outside his house longer than it should have. He peeked through the curtain, catching only the shadow of headlights before they slipped away. On the porch swing, the chain creaked once. No wind. Frank's hand tightened around the doorknob. He whispered to himself, "Not panic. Not yet." But deep down, he knew the conflict had only begun. The next morning, Frank brewed a pot of coffee he didn't drink. He sat at the table staring at the fireproof box in the corner. Inside were his notes, the jar of whiskey, and the scraps of evidence tying his son to a crime no father wanted to believe. His hand hovered over the phone more than once, tempted to call the police. But the thought of saying the words out loud, "My son tried to kill me," felt like hammering the final nail in a coffin he wasn't ready to build. Instead, he called Linda Carson for an update. "Robert's stronger today," she said. "The doctors think he'll recover, but they're keeping him under observation." "That's good," Frank said softly. Linda hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Frank, I need to ask. That bottle, it was from Ethan, wasn't it?" Frank's throat tightened. He wanted to lie, to shield Ethan, but Linda deserved the truth. "Yes," he admitted. "It was." The silence on the line said everything. That afternoon, Frank's sister-in-law, Marjorie, showed up at his door. She was a sharp-tongued woman who had never hidden her dislike for him. Well, she said, stepping inside without asking. "I hear Robert nearly died after drinking something you gave him. What kind of man poisons his own friend?" Frank bristled. "I didn't poison anyone. That whiskey came from Ethan." Marjorie raised her brows. "Oh, so now you're blaming your son? Convenient. Everyone in town knows Ethan's done well for himself. Maybe you're just jealous." Frank's jaw clenched. "Jealous? I raised that boy. I gave him everything I had. And he still left you," she snapped. "Maybe you should ask yourself why." The words cut deeper than Frank wanted to admit. "Marjorie," he said coldly, "you've never liked me. But you don't know the truth of what's happening here. You don't know what Ethan's capable of." She scoffed, her eyes flashing. "What I know is you've always been a bitter old man, and now you're trying to drag Ethan down with you. Maybe you can't stand that he built a better life than you ever could." Frank's voice hardened. "Get out!" Marjorie smirked, but she left, muttering something about family shame. When the door shut, Frank's shoulders sagged. The unfairness burned like fire in his chest. He had worked his whole life for his family, and now he was painted as the villain. That evening, Ethan called again. "Dad," he said, his tone falsely sweet. "I've been hearing rumors. People saying you're telling folks I had something to do with Robert's illness." "I'm not spreading rumors," Frank replied. "I'm telling the truth." "The truth?" Ethan laughed sharply. "The truth is, you've lost your grip. You're paranoid. Sitting in that dusty house with your notebooks, inventing stories about me. Do you even hear yourself?" Frank's grip on the phone tightened. "You sent me a bottle you knew I couldn't drink. Robert nearly died because of it. That's not a story. That's fact." "Ah. Or maybe," Ethan said, his voice dripping with contempt, "you just can't handle that people care about me more than they care about you. Maybe you're so desperate for attention that you'll spin anything to make me the villain." The insult hit hard, but Frank forced himself to stay calm. "I don't need attention, Ethan. I need the truth. And I'll find it with or without you." Ethan's voice dropped, cold and measured. "Be careful, Dad. You start pointing fingers, people might start pointing them back at you." Then the line went dead. Later that night, Frank's niece, Caroline, stopped by. Unlike Marjorie, she was kinder, but her words still stung. "Uncle Frank," she said gently, "everyone's talking. They say Robert's collapse has something to do with you. That you've been unstable since Aunt Linda passed." Frank's chest tightened. "Is that what Ethan told you?" Caroline hesitated. "He said you've been lonely, that sometimes you confuse things, that maybe you're not remembering right." Frank felt his stomach drop. Ethan wasn't just deflecting, he was rewriting the story, painting his father as a senile old man. "Caroline," Frank said firmly, "look me in the eye. Do I look confused to you?" She studied him for a long moment, then shook her head. Number you don't. Then don't believe everything Ethan says. Believe what you see. Caroline nodded slowly, but doubt lingered in her eyes. That night, Frank sat at the table, the house heavy with silence. The betrayal cut deeper than he'd ever imagined. Not just the poison, not just the lies, but the way Ethan twisted the family against him. It wasn't enough that Ethan had tried to kill him. Now he was trying to erase him, to make him look like a mad old man. Frank wrote another card for the fireproof box. Ethan accusing me of confusion. Marjorie spreading rumors. Family turning away. He slid it into the stack. Each card another nail in a coffin of truth he couldn't bury. When he finally stood to lock the doors for the night, he found the porch swing moving again. No wind. No footsteps. Just the creak of chains in the darkness. Frank whispered to himself, steady and low. I'm not losing my mind. I know what's real. But the night gave no answer. The following morning, Frank woke to the sound of his landline ringing, a sound that had grown rare in the age of cell phones. He rubbed his eyes and answered. Mr. Dalton? The voice was steady, professional. This is Detective Reyes. St. Luke's contacted us regarding Mr. Carson's condition. I'd like to ask you a few questions about the whiskey he consumed. Frank's heart thudded. Finally, someone official. Yes, of course, he said. I still have a sample of it, in a mason jar. I can bring it to you. Keep it safe, Reyes instructed. I'll meet you this afternoon. After hanging up, Frank sat at the table staring at the jar in its paper bag. The thought of handing it over was a relief and a loss. That jar was proof, the kind that kept him steady when doubt tried to creep in. Around noon, his niece Caroline came by again, this time with her mother, Marjorie. Marjorie wasted no time. So now the police are involved. And of course, you've dragged Ethan's name into it. I didn't drag him, Frank said evenly. He put himself there when he sent me that bottle. Marjorie folded her arms. You're destroying your son's life with these accusations. Do you realize what you're doing? I'm trying to save mine, Frank shot back. Caroline shifted uncomfortably. Uncle Frank, I want to believe you. But Ethan says you've been writing everything down like some kind of conspiracy. He says you don't trust anyone anymore. Frank's jaw clenched. I write things down because I do trust, but I trust evidence, not lies. Ethan wants you to think I'm losing my mind, but I'm not. I know what I saw. I know what I gave Robert, Marjorie sneered. Or maybe you poisoned it yourself and now you're blaming Ethan to cover it up. The cruelty of the words struck like a blade. Frank's hands shook, but his voice was firm. Get out of my house! Caroline looked torn, but Marjorie dragged her toward the door. Come on, let him stew in his paranoia. When the door slammed, Frank sat heavily at the table, the room spinning with rage and grief. To be accused of poisoning his own friend by family while his son walked free, smiling in their trust. He added another card to the fireproof box. Marjorie accusing me of poisoning Robert myself. Ethan planting seeds in their heads. Later that day, Detective Reyes arrived. He was younger than Frank expected, but his eyes were sharp. May I? Reyes asked, gesturing to the box. Frank opened it carefully, taking out the mason jar, his notes, and the small recorder he'd begun carrying in his jacket pocket. Reyes examined the jar. We'll send this to the lab. You've done well keeping it uncontaminated. Then he flipped through the cards Frank had written. These timelines, they're meticulous. I know my son, Frank said quietly. He's clever. He'll twist everything. I need the truth written down before it gets lost. Reyes nodded. That's exactly what we need. Keep writing. Keep every detail. And Mr. Dalton, don't confront him again. Let us handle it. Frank looked away. He's my son! And that makes it harder, Reyes said gently. But it also makes it more dangerous. That night, Frank couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He double-checked the doors, the windows, even strung a thin thread across the bottom of the front door, an old trick from his service days. If anyone entered, the thread would break. At midnight, he woke to the porch swing creaking again. This time, when he peeked through the curtain, he saw a figure at the edge of the yard, too far to identify. Standing still, watching. His heart hammered, but he didn't move. After a long moment, the figure turned and disappeared into the night. Frank didn't sleep again. He sat in the living room chair, shotgun across his knees, whispering to himself, "I'm not crazy. I'm not imagining this." The next morning, his daughter-in-law Leah came to see him. Her face was pale, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "Frank," she said, wringing her hands, "I don't know how much I should tell you, but I think Ethan's been hiding things." Frank's chest tightened. "What kind of things?" "In the garage," she whispered. "Jars, plants, notes about extracts. I thought it was just a hobby, but some of the words looked dangerous. Latin names I didn't recognize. He won't let me touch them." Frank swallowed hard. "Did you ever see the name white snakeroot?" Her eyes widened. "Yes, on his laptop. I thought it was research." Frank reached across the table, gripping her hands. "You need to take photos, anything you can, and then get yourself somewhere safe." Leah nodded quickly, tears welling. "I don't understand why he's doing this. Why to you?" Frank's voice was low, heavy with sorrow. "Because I'm the only one who knows who he really is." That evening, Ethan called again. His voice was calm, too calm. "Dad, we need to stop this nonsense. Leah's upset. You're turning her against me." "I didn't turn her," Frank said. "You did, with your lies and your jars in the garage." A sharp inhale. Then Ethan's voice dropped, colder. "You've been in my house?" "I don't need to," Frank said. "The truth has a way of leaking out." "You always were stubborn," Ethan muttered. "Maybe this time it'll kill you." The line went dead. Frank sat frozen, the words echoing in his mind. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was threat. He wrote the sentence on a new card. "Maybe this time it'll kill you." He slid it into the fireproof box, his hands trembling. That night, as the house creaked around him, Frank whispered into the silence, "You're my son, my blood, but if you think I'll let you finish what you started, you don't know me at all." The quiet walls didn't answer, but Frank's resolve hardened. He would not be silenced, not by fear, not even by family. The morning light streamed in pale through the blinds, but Frank felt no warmth. His coffee sat untouched, the steam long gone. The fireproof box remained on the table, as constant as his own heartbeat, its contents growing heavier with each passing day. Detective Reyes had promised to keep him updated. Still, the silence gnawed at Frank. He wondered if the police were moving fast enough, or if Ethan's charm would shield him, just as it always had. At 9 o'clock sharp, the phone rang. "Mr. Dalton, this is Reyes. The preliminary state lab report came back. Your friend Gary was right. The whiskey contained white snakeroot, lethal in the right dose." Frank closed his eyes. "So, it wasn't just suspicion. It's fact." "It's fact," Reyes confirmed. "We're preparing a warrant to search Ethan's property, but we'll need your continued cooperation." "You'll have it," Frank said. His voice cracked slightly. "Just make sure you're ready. He's not a man who'll go quietly." That afternoon, Frank drove to the hospital. Robert was sitting up, pale but stronger. "You look like hell," Robert teased weakly. "You should see yourself," Frank retorted, managing a faint smile. Linda Carson hovered nearby, relief and exhaustion etched on her face. "The doctors say he's out of immediate danger. They're hopeful." Frank pulled a chair close. "Robert, I need to tell you something. The police confirmed it. The whiskey was poisoned." Robert's eyes darkened. "And you think Ethan did it?" "I don't just think," Frank said. "I know, but knowing isn't proving. Robert studied him for a long moment, then reached out, gripping his arm with surprising strength. You've always been steady, Frank. Don't lose that now. Whatever he's done, don't let him drag you into the mud. Frank nodded. But deep down, he knew mud was exactly where Ethan wanted him. When Frank returned home, his sister-in-law Marjorie was waiting on the porch. Well, isn't this a sight? She sneered. The whole town's talking. You've gone to the police about your own son. Shameful. Frank's stomach twisted. Shameful is what Ethan did. Shameful is letting him walk free while Robert nearly died. Marjorie scoffed. Oh, please. You've always resented Ethan's success. Now you're painting him as some kind of criminal because you can't stand being left behind. Frank's voice rose, sharper than he intended. He tried to kill me, Marjorie. And when that failed, Robert took the blow. Marjorie's eyes narrowed. Or maybe you poisoned Robert yourself. Ever think of that? Maybe you wanted sympathy. Maybe you wanted to play the victim. The accusation slammed into Frank like a punch. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Get off my property, he said finally, his voice low and dangerous. Marjorie smirked. You're finished, Frank. When this all comes out, no one will believe a bitter old man over his son. She stormed off, leaving him trembling with fury. Inside, Frank scribbled furiously on a new card. Marjorie accusing me directly. Ethan feeding her lies. He slid it into the box, slamming the lid shut. That evening, his daughter-in-law Leah returned, her face pale but determined. I brought something, she said, setting a small flash drive on the table. Photos from Ethan's garage, the jars, the notes, some screenshots from his laptop too. Frank stared at her, gratitude softening his features. You've just done more for me than anyone else has, Leah. Thank you. Tears shimmered in her eyes. I don't know how I missed it for so long. I thought he was just distant. But this? This is monstrous. Frank's chest ached. He's my son, and I'd give anything for it not to be true. But we can't look away anymore. The phone rang again later that night. Ethan's number. Frank let it go to voicemail, then pressed play. Dad. Ethan's voice was tight, almost frantic. You've made a mistake going to the cops. They don't understand. You don't understand. We could have handled this ourselves. Now it's out of control. Call me back before it's too late. Frank sat in silence, replaying the words. We could have handled this ourselves. That wasn't the voice of innocence. That was the voice of a man caught in his own trap. He transcribed the voicemail, slid it into the box, then poured himself a glass of water. His hand trembled as he lifted it, but his voice was steady when he whispered to the empty house. You've already made it too late, son. The next day, Reyes called again. We've secured the warrant. We'll be searching Ethan's property tomorrow morning. I want you to stay away, no contact. Frank swallowed. And if he contacts me? Document it. Don't engage. Don't let him pull you in. Frank hung up, staring at the box. Each card inside was a piece of truth, a chain binding him to a reality he never wanted. He imagined Ethan's face when the police arrived, imagined the charm slipping away to reveal what lurked beneath. And yet, a father's heart ached. He remembered Ethan as a boy, running through the yard, laughter spilling into the summer air. He remembered teaching him to hammer nails, to bait a hook, to drive the old Chevy truck. How had that boy become this man? The question echoed in his mind, unanswered, as the porch swing creaked again in the still night air. This time Frank didn't look away. He stood at the window, shotgun in hand, and whispered, I see you. The swing stilled. The yard fell silent. But Frank knew the worst was yet to come. The morning of the search arrived, gray and heavy, clouds pressing low against the horizon. Frank stood at his window, watching Detective Reyes's unmarked car roll past his farmhouse, headed toward Ethan's neat suburban street. His stomach knotted. He wanted to be there, to see it unfold with his own eyes, but Reyes's warning echoed in his head. Stay away. No contact. So, he waited. Every tick of the clock hammered against his chest. He busied his hands, splitting kindling, tightening screws on the porch railing, anything to keep from pacing holes in the floor. By late afternoon, the call finally came. Mr. Dalton, Reyes said, we executed the warrant. We found jars in Ethan's garage, dried plants, labeled extracts, even handwritten notes about dosages. White snakeroot was among them. Frank closed his eyes. Relief and devastation mingled like storm clouds. So it's true. All of it. It's evidence, Reyes confirmed. But it's not the full picture yet. Ethan claims he was experimenting with herbal remedies. Says he read about alternative medicine online. Frank's jaw tightened. Alternative medicine doesn't end up in a bottle of whiskey. That's why we'll be testing everything we seized. For now, Ethan's been brought in for questioning. Frank's breath caught. And? Reyes hesitated. He's calm, almost smug. Denies any intent to harm. But we'll keep pressing. By evening, word had spread. Small towns carried news faster than wildfire. Frank's phone rang nonstop, neighbors, old friends, curious voices asking if it was true. He answered none of them. Instead, his sister-in-law, Marjorie, barged in without knocking, face flushed with fury. You called the police on your own son? She spat. Do you realize what you've done to this family's name? Frank's patience snapped. I didn't put poison in that bottle, Marjorie. Ethan did. She jabbed a finger at him. Ethan's brilliant. He has a career, a future. And you, sitting here with your notebooks and shotgun, you're dragging him down because you can't stand that he outgrew you. Frank rose, his voice sharp. Don't you dare talk to me about outgrowing. I raised that boy. I clothed him, fed him, worked myself into the ground so he could have a life. And now he's tried to bury me in the ground. That's not outgrowing, Marjorie. That's betrayal. Caroline, who had come with her mother, looked between them, eyes wide. Mom, maybe Uncle Frank's telling the truth. The police wouldn't search Ethan's house for nothing. Marjorie snapped. They'll find nothing because there's nothing. And when this blows over, Frank, you'll be the one everyone remembers as a bitter, senile fool. Frank pointed to the door. Get out, both of you. If you can't see the truth, you've chosen your side already. Caroline lingered for a moment, her gaze soft, conflicted. Then she followed her mother out, leaving the air heavy with silence. That night, Frank couldn't sit still. He pulled out his old service journal from the army, flipping through notes he'd written decades ago. He'd always trusted records, trusted that truth on paper survived when memory faltered. He added a new card to the fireproof box. Police found white snakeroot in Ethan's garage. Marjorie still denies. Caroline uncertain. The act steadied him. Each word was a defense against the gaslighting, the whispers, the doubt. The next day, Detective Reyes showed up in person. He set a folder on Frank's table. Inside were photographs. Ethan's garage, shelves lined with jars, notebooks filled with Latin names and chemical notations. We'll run chemical analysis on all of it, Reyes said. But one thing stood out. He slid forward a page torn from Ethan's notebook. Frank leaned closer. His stomach dropped. On the page, in Ethan's handwriting, was a list of potential delivery methods: tea, capsules, alcohol infusions. And beneath it, underlined twice, Father Whiskey. Frank's throat closed. The room spun. Reyes's voice was calm but firm. This isn't speculation anymore, Mr. Dalton. This shows intent. Frank's hands trembled as he touched the page. His son hadn't just been careless. He had written it down, planned it. Why? Frank whispered. Why would he do this? Reyes shook his head. That's what we intend to find out. Money, resentment, inheritance, sometimes it's simpler than we want to believe. Later that night, the phone rang again. Frank recognized the number instantly, the county jail. He hesitated, then answered. Dad? Ethan's voice was calm, almost cheerful. So you've seen the notes. Frank's grip tightened. Why, Ethan? Why would you even write my name next to poison? A low chuckle. Because I knew one day you'd find it, and I wanted you to know it wasn't an accident. Every word, every ounce of it, deliberate. Frank's chest constricted. You tried to kill me. No, Ethan corrected softly. I tried to free myself. You've been a chain around my neck since the day I was born. Duty, discipline, your way or nothing. I'm tired of being the son of Frank Dalton. I wanted my own life. And if you were gone, well, that life would come easier. Frank's hand shook so violently he almost dropped the phone. You're my blood, he whispered. My only son. Blood doesn't mean loyalty, Ethan said coldly. And loyalty doesn't mean love. Then the line clicked dead. Frank sat in the dark long after the call ended, the words burrowing deep into his chest. He had raised Ethan with everything he had, only to be discarded like a broken tool. He pulled a fresh card and wrote the words exactly as he'd heard them. Blood doesn't mean loyalty, and loyalty doesn't mean love. He slid it into the box, locking it with trembling hands. For the first time, Frank allowed himself to cry, not for his own fear, but for the boy he had lost long ago, the boy who had once laughed in his yard and called him Dad with love. That boy was gone. In his place stood a man who wanted him dead. The following morning, Frank's phone buzzed with another call from Detective Reyes. Mr. Dalton, Reyes said, we finished the first round of analysis on the materials from Ethan's garage. Several extracts were concentrated lethal levels. And the notes we found, they're damning. He wasn't studying medicine. He was calculating dosages. Frank's breath caught. Dosages for what? Most were hypothetical, Reyes replied. But one was specific dosage for a man in his late 60s with a heart condition. There's the Ray. Frank's knees weakened. He sat heavily in his chair. That's me. He was planning for me. I'm afraid so, Reyes said. We'll be moving forward with charges. Attempted homicide. Frank swallowed hard. And the family? Reyes sighed. That part will be messy. He's already framing this as your paranoia. Some relatives are buying it. Frank rubbed his temples. He's always been good at twisting stories, even as a kid. By midday, the storm arrived at his doorstep. Marjorie again, this time with 2 cousins and even Caroline, though the girl's face was pale with guilt. You're destroying him, Marjorie shouted as soon as Frank opened the door. Do you even care that you're ruining Ethan's life? Frank's voice was quiet, but firm. Ethan ruined his own life when he tried to end mine. You're delusional, Marjorie snapped. Ethan told us everything. He said you've been unstable for years, writing conspiracies, imagining people out to get you. He said you'd twist anything just to feel important again. Frank's jaw tightened. Important? Do you think I want this? Do you think I want to believe my own son tried to kill me? This isn't pride, Marjorie. This is survival. Caroline's eyes shimmered with tears. Uncle Frank, is it really true? The dosage notes? Your name? Frank looked at her, his heart breaking. It's true. The police confirmed it. He wrote my age, my condition, my name. He planned it, Caroline. I wish I could tell you otherwise, but I can't. Caroline covered her mouth, torn between loyalty and truth. One of the cousins muttered, Maybe Frank's right. Why would the police lie? But Marjorie snapped. The police make mistakes all the time. This is just an old man's paranoia feeding their narrative. Ethan's the victim here, not Frank. Frank's hands trembled, but his voice was steady. If you choose to believe that, You're as blind as he is cruel. That night, Frank sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at his fireproof box. He opened it, leafing through the cards. Each one was a memory, a record, a defense against the lies being spun around him. He pulled out the card where he had written Ethan's chilling words. Blood doesn't mean loyalty, and loyalty doesn't mean love. The ink seemed darker now, heavier, as if the words themselves carried weight. Linda, he whispered to the photo on the mantel, I wish you were here to see this, to tell me I'm not losing my mind. A knock startled him. He stood cautiously, peeking through the curtain. Caroline stood on the porch, wringing her hands. He opened the door. Caroline? She stepped inside, her voice low. I'm sorry, Uncle Frank. I shouldn't have come with them earlier. I just didn't know what to believe. Frank softened. And now? She handed him a folded piece of paper. I went to Ethan's house. I pretended I was checking on Leah. She showed me this. It's part of his journal. She tore it out for me. Frank unfolded the paper. His stomach turned. It was Ethan's handwriting. A list numbered precise. 1. Dad, whiskey. 2. Robert, backup. 3. Marjorie, inheritance ally. 4. Caroline, pliable. At the bottom, underlined twice. Remove obstacles. Secure farm. Frank's hand shook. His eyes burned with fury. He wrote it like a business plan. Like killing me was just another task. Caroline's tears spilled. I didn't want to believe it. But I can't deny this. Frank placed the page in the fireproof box, locking it with trembling hands. Thank you, Caroline. You've just given me the truth that no one can deny. The following morning, Reyes called again. Mr. Dalton, Ethan's been released on bail. His lawyer argued the evidence wasn't enough for continued detention. He'll be out today. Frank's blood ran cold. Released? After everything you found? It's temporary, Reyes reassured. But be careful. He may come to you. Frank looked out the window at the porch swing, motionless in the early dawn. He already has, he whispered. That night, as Frank secured his locks, headlights swept across his yard. A car slowed, then stopped at the end of the drive. Frank's breath caught. The porch swing creaked, as though stirred by unseen hands. He stepped onto the porch, shotgun in hand, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. Ethan! He called into the night. If it's you, come out. No more shadows. No more whispers. Face me. The car idled. The swing groaned once more. Then silence. Finally, the car rolled away into the darkness, leaving Frank alone with the echo of his own words. He lowered the shotgun, whispering into the night, The truth will find you, son, whether you want it to or not. The next afternoon, Frank sat on the porch with a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. His gaze never left the end of the driveway. Ever since Detective Reyes called about Ethan's bail, Frank knew it was only a matter of time. And sure enough, as the sun dipped low, a sleek black truck pulled into the yard. Ethan stepped out, dressed sharp as ever, his expression calm but his eyes glinting with something darker. Dad, he called smoothly, we need to talk. Frank stood slowly, setting the mug aside. There's nothing left to say. Oh, there's plenty, Ethan replied, striding up the porch steps like he owned the place. For starters, you've humiliated me, called the cops, dragged my name through the mud, poisoned the family against me. Frank's chest burned. I didn't poison the family. You did with lies, with greed, with your damn poison in that bottle. Ethan smirked. That's the story you keep telling. But tell me, Dad, who do you think they'll believe? The successful son with a career, or the old man scribbling paranoid notes in a farmhouse? Frank's jaw tightened. I have your notes, Ethan. Your lists. Your dosages. Caroline brought them to me. The truth's catching up. For the first time, Ethan's composure cracked. His smile faltered, his eyes flashing with rage. Caroline, he spat. That little traitor. Frank's voice was steady. She saw what you are, and so do I. Ethan leaned closer, his voice dropping low. You always did love playing the martyr, Dad. But this time, you've written your own obituary. Before Frank could reply, tires crunched on gravel. Marjorie's car pulled in, followed by another relative. They piled out quickly, rushing up the porch. Ethan! Marjorie exclaimed, pulling him into a hug. Don't you worry, we know the truth. We're here for you. Then she turned on Frank, her face twisted with fury. How dare you treat your own son like this? You've lost all sense. Frank shook his head, incredulous. He tried to kill me, Marjorie. He tried to poison me. And when Robert got the bottle instead, he nearly died. And you're still defending him? Marjorie folded her arms. Because we're not fools. We know desperation when we see it. You're alone, Frank. You want attention, sympathy. Blaming Ethan gives you that. Frank's heart pounded, but he refused to back down. You think this is about attention? I'd give anything to be wrong. But I'm not, and deep down, you know it. Ethan laid a hand on Marjorie's shoulder, playing the role of the calm, wronged son. It's fine, Aunt Marjorie. Dad's confused. He's always been strict, always had to control everything. Maybe this is just his way of holding onto power, now that he's old. Marjorie nodded quickly, glaring at Frank. Exactly. He can't stand that you've outgrown him. Frank's voice cut like steel. Outgrown me? He's not outgrown me. He's trying to bury me. The relatives flinched at the venom in his tone, but Ethan smiled faintly, like he had already won. That night, after they left, Frank sat at his table, the silence of the house pressing down like a weight. He pulled out a fresh card and wrote in steady block letters. Ethan confronted me in person, denied everything. Marjorie defended him, called me desperate for attention. Ethan threatened me indirectly again. He slid the card into the fireproof box, his hands steady. The box was no longer just a container, it was his shield, his proof, his sanity preserved against the storm of lies. He poured himself a glass of water, staring at the empty chair across from him. Linda, he whispered, I wish you were here. You'd know what to say. You'd see through him. The porch swing creaked again, slow and deliberate. This time, Frank didn't flinch. He picked up his shotgun and stepped outside. The yard was empty, the air still. The swing rocked back and forth, as though pushed by invisible hands. Frank stood tall, his voice cutting through the night. I'm not afraid of you, Ethan. Not anymore. You want me gone? You'll have to face me, not shadows. The swing stilled. The yard fell silent. The next morning, Frank drove into town to see Detective Reyes. We need to move fast, Frank said, sliding Caroline's note across the desk. He's out there, free, and he won't stop. Reyes studied the page, his brow furrowing. This is strong. A plan, names, priorities. Coupled with the dosages, this strengthens the case. But Frank, Reyes leaned forward. You need to be careful. Ethan has every reason to silence you now. Don't be alone if you can help it. Frank gave a humorless smile. I've been alone for years. I can handle it. Reyes shook his head. This isn't about handling it. It's about surviving it. When Frank returned home, he found Leah waiting on his porch. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling. I can't do this anymore, she whispered. I can't live in that house with him, pretending nothing's wrong. He's not the man I married, Frank. He's dangerous, and I have. Frank guided her inside, poured her a glass of water. You've done more than enough already. You got me the evidence. You believed me when no one else did. Leah shook her head. But what if he comes for me next? What if he finds out I helped you? Frank's voice was steady. Then you'll stay here. At least for tonight. He won't touch you under my roof. Her tears spilled. You'd protect me? Even after everything? Frank placed a hand over hers. Family protects family. That's what Ethan never understood. That night, Frank lay awake, listening to every creak of the house, every rustle of wind outside. Leah slept fitfully in the guest room, her quiet sobs drifting down the hall. Frank stared at the fireproof box in the corner, its lock glinting in the faint moonlight. Inside was the truth, but truth alone wouldn't stop Ethan. Sooner or later, father and son would collide, and only one would walk away unbroken. The night after Leah moved into the farmhouse, Frank barely slept. Every creak of the old wood sounded like a footstep, every gust of wind like a whisper at the door. He sat in the living room, shotgun resting across his lap, watching the faint glow of the porch light. Leah stirred down the hall, her sobs muffled by a pillow. Frank's heart ached for her, a young woman trapped in the same web he was, betrayed by the man they both should have been able to trust. By dawn, he'd written another card. Leah left Ethan, afraid for her life. Staying with me now. He slid it into the fireproof box, locking it tight. That morning, Caroline returned. She carried a bag of groceries, her hands shaking slightly. I thought you might need these, she said softly. Frank gave a weary smile. Thank you, sweetheart. You didn't have to. Caroline hesitated, then glanced at the guest room door. Is it true that Leah's here? Yes, Frank said. She couldn't stay with him any longer. Caroline bit her lip. Mom's furious. She says you've poisoned everyone against Ethan. She says Leah's just hysterical, that you've convinced her of lies. Frank's jaw tightened. And what do you say? Caroline met his eyes, her voice trembling. I say, I've seen enough to know you're telling the truth, but I don't know how to stand against my own mother. Frank reached out, squeezing her hand gently. Sometimes, standing for the truth means standing alone. But you won't be alone, Caroline. Not if you hold on to what you know is right. Tears welled in her eyes. She nodded, setting the groceries down before hurrying out, afraid to stay too long. That evening, as Frank and Leah ate a quiet dinner, headlights swept across the yard again. This time, a car pulled in fast, gravel spitting under the tires. Ethan stepped out, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with rage. He stormed up the porch steps, pounding on the door. Dad, he shouted, open this damn door. Frank rose, heart hammering. He motioned for Leah to stay back, then opened the door just enough to see his son's face. Ethan's smile was gone. His voice was low, dangerous. You think you can hide her from me? You think you can turn my wife against me? Frank's grip tightened on the doorframe. I didn't turn her. You did, with your own actions. Ethan leaned closer, his breath hot. You're making a mistake. You're destroying this family. Frank's voice was steady. Number, you destroyed it the moment you put poison in that bottle. Ethan's face twisted. You think the police will save you? They don't care about you. You're just an old man scribbling notes. Without me, you're nothing. Frank met his glare head on. Without you, I'm alive. For a moment, Ethan's mask slipped completely. His eyes burned with raw hatred. Then, just as quickly, he straightened, forcing a smile. Fine, he said coolly. Stay with your box of lies. But remember, Dad, even the strongest locks can break. He turned sharply, storming back to his truck. The tires screamed as he sped into the night, leaving silence in his wake. Inside, Leah trembled. He's going to come back. I know him. He won't let this go. Frank guided her to a chair, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. Then we'll be ready. He walked to the fireproof box, sliding in a new card. Ethan came to the house. Threatened me. Threatened Leah, mask slipping. He locked the box, the click echoing in the silence. The next morning, Detective Reyes arrived. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed from too many sleepless nights. We're building the case, Mr. Dalton, he said. But Ethan's playing the victim card hard. Some of your family's backing him, claiming you're unstable. Frank gave a humorless laugh. That's been his play all along. Paint me as the crazy old man while he spins the story. Reyes leaned closer. But we've got cracks in his armor now. That journal page, the dosages, Leah's testimony, it's strong. We just need one more push, something undeniable. Frank glanced at the box. I'll keep writing. I'll keep recording. So when he makes that mistake, and he will, we'll be ready. Reyes nodded. Good. But Frank, be careful. He's dangerous, and desperate men do desperate things. That night, Frank sat alone by the fire. Leah had finally fallen asleep, her breathing soft down the hall. The house was quiet, but Frank's mind wasn't free. He thought of Ethan as a boy, fishing by the creek, laughing when he slipped in the mud. He thought of the pride he'd once felt, the hope that his son would grow into a good man. Now that hope was ash. The porch swing creaked again, louder this time. Frank stood, shotgun in hand, moving to the window. Through the glass, he saw the swing rocking hard, but no one sat in it. His chest tightened. He whispered into the empty night, I know it's you, Ethan. Watching. Waiting. But I'm not afraid anymore. You've taken enough from me. You won't take the rest. The swing slowed. The night fell still. And Frank knew the storm was about to break. 2 nights later, the storm finally broke. Frank woke to the sound of shattering glass. His heart leapt as he grabbed the shotgun from beside his bed. Down the hall, Leah screamed. He rushed to the kitchen, finding the window smashed, shards glinting on the floor. Cold night air poured in. The curtains fluttered like frantic wings. Stay in the room, Frank shouted to Leah. He scanned the dark kitchen, his pulse hammering. The door to the back porch creaked open, slow, deliberate. And then he heard it, Ethan's voice, low and taunting. Dad, come out, come out. You can't hide behind your little notes forever. Frank's grip tightened on the shotgun. You're trespassing, Ethan. Leave before it's too late. Ethan laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. Or what? You'll shoot your own son? That'd make quite the story for the papers, wouldn't it? Old man kills boy because he couldn't handle being irrelevant. Frank's voice was steady, but his chest burned. I won't let you hurt anyone else. Not me, not Leah, not Robert, no more. There was silence, then footsteps retreating into the night. A car door slammed. Tires screeched down the gravel drive, leaving the house trembling in his wake. Frank lowered the shotgun slowly, his breath ragged. He knew this wasn't over. This was Ethan testing him, pushing him closer to the edge. The next morning, Caroline appeared again, pale and frantic. Uncle Frank, I don't know what to do. Mom says you smashed your own window to make Ethan look guilty. She says you're trying to frame him. Frank's chest ached. Caroline listened to me. He was here. I heard him. He called out to me. Caroline's eyes shimmered. I believe you, but no one else does. They're all saying you've lost your mind. Frank's voice broke. Then let them say it. The truth doesn't need their permission to exist. She hugged him suddenly, fiercely. Please, don't give up. Someone has to fight him. Frank's arms wrapped around her, his throat tight. I won't stop. Not until it's finished. Later that day, Detective Reyes returned. He studied the broken window, the footprints in the dirt outside, the tire marks on the gravel. He was here, Reyes said grimly. But without video or an eyewitness other than you, it's your word against his again. And right now, he's still convincing people you're unstable. Frank's shoulders slumped. So what do I do? Just wait until he finishes the job? Reyes placed a hand on his shoulder. Number. You keep documenting. You keep the box. Every word, every threat, every shred of evidence, it matters. Because men like Ethan, they don't stop. They push and push until they expose themselves. And when he does, we'll be ready. Frank nodded slowly, though dread coiled in his gut. That evening, Marjorie returned, this time dragging Robert's son with her. Frank, Marjorie said coldly, you've poisoned this family long enough. Ethan told us what happened last night. Said you staged it. Said you're spiraling out of control. Robert's son glared. My dad almost died, Frank. If you had anything to do with that whiskey. Frank cut him off sharply. Your father almost died because Ethan poisoned that bottle, and if you choose to believe otherwise, you're as blind as the rest of them. Marjorie's lips curled. You're pathetic, hiding behind lies, turning everyone against us. You should be ashamed. Frank stepped closer, his eyes burning. Ashamed? Number ashamed is a son who plots his father's death. Ashamed is a family too cowardly to face the truth. One day soon you'll see him for what he really is. And when you do, I hope you remember these words. Marjorie sneered and stormed off, dragging Robert's son with her. The slam of the door echoed like thunder. That night, Frank added another card to the box. Ethan broke into the house. Threatened me directly. Family still defending him. They will see when it's too late. He slid it inside, locking it tight. As he sat back, exhaustion weighing heavy on him, Leah entered the room. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. Frank, she whispered, I found something in Ethan's briefcase before I left. I didn't know if I should bring it, but I think you need to see this. She handed him a folded document. Frank opened it slowly, his breath catching. It was a copy of his will, or rather, a forged version. The farm, the land, every asset all signed over to Ethan. The signature at the bottom looked like his own, but Frank knew instantly it wasn't. His stomach dropped. He was preparing to take everything. Even if he couldn't kill me, he'd steal my name, my will, my life. Leah's eyes filled with tears. He won't stop until he has it all. Frank placed the document into the fireproof box, his hands trembling. Then he looked up, his eyes burning with fire. No, he said firmly. He won't stop, but neither will I. That night, as the wind howled through the broken window, Frank sat in the dark, shotgun at his side, the fireproof box glowing faintly in the moonlight. The porch swing creaked again, long and slow. Frank didn't move. He stared into the darkness outside, whispering into the silence. Come on, Ethan. Whatever you're planning, whatever you're hiding, I'm ready for you. The swing rocked harder, then stilled. The night fell silent once more. Frank closed his eyes, the weight of everything pressing down on him. The conflict had reached its boiling point. Soon, one way or another, it would explode. The farmhouse felt like a powder keg, waiting for a single spark. For days, Frank and Leah lived in uneasy silence. Every night, the porch swing creaked, and every morning, new tire marks appeared at the end of the drive. Ethan was circling, testing, waiting. On the fifth night, the storm broke. Frank was in the living room when the power went out. The lights flickered once, then died, plunging the house into darkness. Leah gasped from down the hall. Stay in the room, Frank called. He reached for the shotgun, his heart pounding. A voice drifted through the broken window, low and mocking. Dad, are you awake? Or are you too old and tired to fight back? Frank's grip tightened. Show yourself, Ethan. The door creaked open slowly. A flashlight beam cut through the dark, landing on Frank's face. Ethan stepped into the room, dressed in black, his smile cold. This ends tonight, Ethan said. Frank raised the shotgun. You're right. It does. Ethan laughed. You won't pull that trigger. You've never had the guts to go through with consequences. That's why Mom died miserable. That's why you sit here alone. You talk about discipline, about strength, but you've always been weak. Frank's chest burned with rage. Weak? I carried this family. I worked my hands raw so you could live soft. I gave you everything, Ethan. And this is how you repay me? Ethan's smile widened. I repay you by finally taking what should have been mine all along. He reached into his coat and pulled out a paper, waving it in the beam of his flashlight. Recognize this? Your will. Signed, sealed, delivered. The farm, the land all mine. Frank's eyes narrowed. Forgery. Proof, Ethan countered. To everyone else, it'll look real. And when you're gone, no one will question it. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I poisoned the whiskey, Dad. I planned it. I wrote your name. And I don't regret it. You've been dead to me for years. I'm just finishing the job. Frank's hands shook, not with fear, but with fury. And yet, he didn't pull the trigger. Not yet. Instead, he gave a bitter smile. Thank you, son. That's exactly what I needed. Ethan frowned. What are you talking about? Frank gestured toward the fireproof box in the corner. Its red recording light glowed faintly. You think you're the only one who can plan? That box has cameras, microphones. It's been recording this entire conversation. Every word you just said, the confession, the threats, the will, all of it's on tape. Ethan froze, his face draining of color. Frank's voice was steady now, calm as steel. You thought you could gaslight me, convince the family I'd lost my mind. But I've been preparing for this moment all along. You wanted to play games, Ethan? I wrote the rules. Ethan's rage exploded. He lunged forward, knocking the shotgun aside. The two men struggled, crashing against the table, sending the lamp shattering to the floor. Old fool, Ethan roared. You think anyone will believe you? You think a recording will save you? Frank grunted, shoving him back with surprising strength. I don't need them to believe me. I just need the truth to outlive me. Ethan swung a fist, connecting with Frank's jaw. Pain flared, but Frank held his ground. He grabbed Ethan by the collar, forcing him against the wall. You could have been a man, Ethan, Frank growled. You could have been better than this. But you chose greed over love, lies over family. Ethan spat in his face. Family means nothing. And then a new voice rang out. You're wrong. Oh. Both men turned. Leah stood in the doorway, holding Frank's old tape recorder. Its red light blinked. I heard everything, she said, her voice trembling but firm. And I've got it all here, too. Ethan's face twisted with fury. You little. He lunged toward her, but Frank stepped between them, shotgun back in his hands. This time, he didn't waver. Try it. And I swear to God, Ethan, I'll stop you myself. For a long, tense moment, father and son stared at each other. Ethan's chest heaved, his fists clenched, but Frank's eyes blazed with a strength he hadn't felt in years. Finally, Ethan sneered. You'll regret this. He bolted for the door, disappearing into the night. Tires screamed down the drive. Silence fell. Frank lowered the shotgun slowly, his breath ragged. Leah collapsed into a chair, sobbing with relief. Frank walked to the fireproof box, opening it with trembling hands. Inside, the recorder blinked, the file saved. He slid it inside, locking it tight. It's done, he whispered. The truth is safe now. But in his heart, he knew it wasn't over. Ethan wouldn't run forever. He would come back. And when he did, Frank would be ready. 2 days later, the sheriff's office called a family meeting. Detective Reyes wanted everyone gathered in one place. Frank, Ethan, Marjorie, Caroline, Robert's family, even Leah. The meeting was held in the church fellowship hall, a neutral space that smelled of old hymnals and coffee. Folding chairs were arranged in a circle. Frank arrived early, fireproof box in hand, setting it firmly at his feet. Ethan walked in last. He was dressed sharp, jaw clean-shaven, confidence radiating like a shield. He greeted relatives warmly, shaking hands, smiling like a man wronged but dignified. Marjorie hovered at his side, whispering encouragement. Frank watched quietly, his heart pounding. He knew how easily Ethan charmed them, but this time, charm wouldn't be enough. Detective Reyes opened the meeting. We're here to discuss the ongoing investigation regarding Robert Carson's poisoning and the allegations involving Mr. Dalton and his son, Ethan. Murmurs rippled through the family. Marjorie crossed her arms tightly. Allegations, she repeated. That's all they are. Reyes raised a hand. Today, we're going to hear both sides. Then, we'll review evidence that has come to light. Ethan stood first, voice smooth and confident. I love my father, always have, but he's been unstable for years. He isolates himself, writes paranoid notes, and convinces himself people are out to get him. This is just the latest story. I never poisoned anyone. I never tried to harm him. He's twisting things to make me look like the villain. Gasps and nods of agreement spread around the room. Marjorie dabbed at her eyes. See? He's a good boy. He would never hurt his father. Frank rose slowly, the box in his hands. His voice was steady, though his heart thundered. You've all heard his charm. You've seen his smile. But you haven't heard what I've heard. You haven't seen what I've seen. He unlocked the box, pulling out the recorder. The small device looked insignificant, but in Frank's trembling hands it felt like a weapon. 2 nights ago, Frank said, Ethan came to my house. He admitted everything. The whiskey, the poison, even the forged will, and I recorded it. The room went silent. Ethan's smile faltered for the first time. That's a lie, Ethan snapped quickly. He's making it up. Frank pressed play. The hall filled with Ethan's voice. I poisoned the whiskey, Dad. I planned it. I wrote your name, and I don't regret it. Gasps erupted. Marjorie's face drained of color. Robert's son swore under his breath. Caroline covered her mouth, tears streaming. Ethan lunged forward. That recording's fake! He doctored it! But Leah stood suddenly, her voice clear and strong. Number. I heard it too. I was there. I recorded part of it myself. She held up her own recorder. Another red light blinked. Reyes took it, pressing play. Ethan's voice again. Family means nothing. The words echoed through the hall like a hammer striking stone. Ethan's mask cracked. His calm smile twisted into a snarl. She's lying. They're both lying. Can't you see what they're doing? They're conspiring against me. Marjorie's hands shook. Ethan, tell me it isn't true. Ethan turned on her, his voice venomous. Oh, don't look so shocked. You were always just a pawn. You, Caroline, all of them. None of you matter. Only the farm does. Only what's owed to me. The room fell into horrified silence. Frank stepped forward, his voice breaking but strong. Do you hear him now? This is who he really is. Not the smiling son, not the successful man, a liar, a poisoner, a man who would kill his own father for land and money. Caroline sobbed, burying her face in her hands. Robert's son stood abruptly, fury in his eyes. You bastard! My father almost died because of you. Detective Reyes moved in, handcuffs ready. Ethan Dalton, you're under arrest for attempted homicide, forgery, and fraud. Ethan struggled, his rage boiling over. You can't do this! He's lying! I'm the victim here! But the family wasn't looking at Frank anymore. They weren't looking at Reyes. They were looking at Ethan, truly seeing him for the first time. Marjorie's tears spilled freely. Caroline sobbed harder. Robert's son clenched his fists, trembling with anger. Ethan's eyes darted around, searching for one last ally. Finding none, he spat at Frank as Reyes dragged him out. This isn't over, old man. You haven't won. Blood doesn't mean loyalty, remember? You taught me that. The doors slammed shut behind him. The hall was silent. All eyes turned to Frank. He stood quietly, the fireproof box at his side, his face lined with grief. I didn't want this, he whispered. I didn't want any of it, but I couldn't let the truth die in silence. I couldn't let him take everything, not without a fight. Caroline rose, tears streaming. She ran into his arms, sobbing. I'm so sorry, Uncle Frank. I should have believed you sooner. Frank held her close, his own tears falling. You did believe. That's what matters. You and Leah, you kept me standing. Marjorie turned away, shame etched into every line of her face. Robert's son muttered something about justice, his anger barely contained. For Frank, none of it mattered. The fight was over. The truth was finally out. But the cost was everything he had once held dear. That night, back at the farmhouse, Frank sat alone by the fire. The swing outside was still at last. He opened the fireproof box, sliding the recorder inside, then closed it for good. It's done, Linda, he whispered to his wife's photo. The truth won, but God, it hurts. The flames flickered, warm against the cold night. And for the first time in months, Frank let himself breathe. For 2 days after Ethan's arrest, the farmhouse was eerily calm. Leah stayed in the guest room, her strength slowly returning. Caroline visited daily, bringing food and sitting with Frank in silence, as if afraid that words would break the fragile peace. But Frank knew it wasn't over. He felt it in his bones, the storm wasn't finished. Ethan had always been relentless, and desperate men did desperate things. On the third night, Frank's phone rang. He answered, expecting Reyes. Instead, it was Ethan's voice, low, venomous, calling from the county jail's payphone. You think you've won, don't you? Ethan hissed. You think your little recording, your pathetic box of notes, is enough to bury me? But I've still got people who believe me. Marjorie's not done. She'll fight for me. Others will too. Frank's jaw tightened. The truth's out, Ethan. Everyone saw it. Everyone heard you. Ethan laughed coldly. People forget. People forgive. You're the only one who won't let go. And that's why, when you die, they'll mourn me more than they'll mourn you. Frank's voice was calm, steady. I'm not afraid of dying, but you should be afraid of what you've become. The line went dead. That night, Frank wrote another card. Ethan called from jail. Threatened me again. Still convinced he'll win. He slid it into the fireproof box and locked it tight. But deep down, his chest felt heavy. He knew Ethan wouldn't accept defeat. The following day, the phone rang again. This time, it was Detective Reyes. Frank, Reyes said urgently. Ethan's lawyer posted bail. He's been released under strict conditions, but he's out. Stay alert. We're watching him, but... Well? You know him better than anyone. Frank closed his eyes, gripping the receiver tight. He'll come here. He won't stop until he faces me. Reyes's voice was grim. Then be ready. And don't be alone. That night, the storm came. Frank sat in the living room, shotgun resting across his knees, Leah trembling on the couch. Caroline had insisted on staying, refusing to leave him alone. The wind howled through the broken window pane, rattling the house. The porch swing creaked in the gale. Then, headlights cut through the darkness. A car screeched into the yard, doors slammed. Ethan's voice rang out, wild and furious. Dad, come out and face me! Frank rose, heart hammering. Stay here, he told the women. He stepped onto the porch, shotgun in hand. Ethan stood in the rain, his suit soaked, his eyes wild. He looked less like a man and more like a beast cornered. You ruined everything, Ethan shouted. The farm should have been mine. The land, the money, the respect, all of it. Frank's voice carried through the storm. You could have had all of it, Ethan. Not through greed, not through lies, but through love, through family. That's the only inheritance that matters. Ethan sneered. Spare me your lectures. You were never a father, just a tyrant hiding behind rules. Well, I'm done playing your son. He reached into his coat, pulling out a knife. The blade gleamed in the lightning. Caroline screamed from the doorway. Leah gasped. Frank raised the shotgun, steady despite his pounding heart. "Don't do this, Ethan. Put it down. It's over." Ethan's eyes burned. "It's never over until you're gone." He lunged forward. The world seemed to slow. Rain pounded. Lightning flashed. Ethan's face twisted with rage. Frank pulled the trigger. The blast shattered the night. Ethan collapsed to the muddy ground, the knife slipping from his hand. Caroline sobbed, rushing to Frank's side. Leah covered her mouth, trembling. Frank lowered the shotgun slowly, his hands shaking. Rain poured down his face, mixing with tears he hadn't realized he was shedding. Ethan groaned, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping through his suit. He wasn't dead, but he was finished. Detective Reyes's car skidded into the yard moments later, lights flashing. Officers poured out, restraining Ethan as he cursed and spat, his fury unbroken even as he was dragged away. Reyes placed a hand on Frank's shoulder. "You had no choice. He was coming at you." Frank nodded numbly, his voice breaking. "He was my son." Reyes's expression softened. "And tonight, you saved yourself, and everyone else he would have hurt." That night, the farmhouse was quiet again. The storm passed, leaving only silence. Frank sat by the fire, staring at the fireproof box. The weight of it seemed heavier than ever. Caroline sat beside him, holding his hand. Leah rested in the chair across from them, pale but safe. Frank whispered to the flames, his voice raw. "Linda, it's over. Our boy is gone. Not by death, but by the choices he made. And God help me, I can't stop grieving for the son I once knew." The porch swing was still at last. And in that silence, Frank knew the war was won. But the scars would never fade. The weeks after the storm felt like waking from a nightmare. Ethan remained in custody, facing charges of attempted homicide, fraud, forgery, and assault. The evidence, the recordings, the forged will, the poisoned whiskey was undeniable. His lawyer fought hard, but the case was ironclad. For the first time in years, the farmhouse was quiet. Too quiet. Frank sat on the porch most evenings, the shotgun put away at last, the fireproof box still at his feet. It had become more than protection, it was his memory, his witness, the thing that had carried him through when no one else believed. But now, with Ethan gone, the silence pressed heavy. One afternoon, Caroline came by with her mother, Marjorie. Marjorie looked older, worn down by guilt. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Frank, I owe you an apology. I defended Ethan. I called you a liar, unstable, desperate. I should have listened sooner." Frank studied her, his weathered face unreadable. Finally, he sighed. "We all wanted to believe he was better than he was. That's what makes betrayal so cruel. It feeds on love." Marjorie's eyes filled with tears. "Can you ever forgive me?" Frank's voice was gentle but firm. "Forgiveness isn't about pretending it never happened. It's about choosing not to carry the weight of hate. For your sake, and mine, I forgive you. But don't forget what we've lived through. Remember it, so it never happens again." Marjorie nodded, tears falling freely. Caroline hugged Frank tight, whispering, "Thank you for everything." Leah stayed longer than expected. She filed for divorce from Ethan, reclaiming her life. One evening, as the sun dipped low, she sat with Frank on the porch. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "You saved me. You gave me the courage to leave." Frank shook his head. "No, Leah, you saved yourself. You saw the truth, even when it hurt. That takes more courage than anything I've done." Her eyes shimmered. "What will you do now?" Frank looked out across the fields, golden in the fading light. "I'll keep living. I'll tend the land. And I'll remember Linda. That's enough." At Ethan's sentencing, the courtroom was heavy with silence. The judge read out the charges, the years of prison he would serve. Ethan stood in shackles, glaring at Frank with eyes full of venom. "You think you've won," he spat, "but you've lost everything. You've got no son, no legacy. You'll die alone." Frank rose slowly, his voice steady but laced with sorrow. "You're wrong, Ethan. I may not have the son I wanted, but I still have family. Caroline, Leah, even Marjorie, when her eyes are open. And I'll have peace, something you'll never know." Ethan sneered, but the bailiffs dragged him away. His words echoed, but they no longer pierced. For Frank, the battle was over. Back at the farmhouse, Frank opened the fireproof box one final time. He sifted through the cards, each one a memory, a wound, a record of survival. One by one, he carried them to the fireplace. Caroline and Leah watched as he set them alight. Flames devoured the ink, turning fear into ash, grief into smoke. Caroline gasped softly. "Are you sure you want to burn them? They were your proof." Frank smiled faintly. "I don't need proof anymore. The truth's already spoken. Now it's time to let go." The fire crackled, warm and cleansing. Later, as the night grew quiet, Frank sat alone on the porch. The swing swayed gently in the breeze, not in menace, but in peace. He looked up at the stars, whispering softly, "Linda, it's done. Our boy is gone, but not forgotten. I'll grieve him, but I won't let grief destroy me. The land will stand. The truth will stand. And maybe, someday, love will heal what he broke." A single tear traced down his weathered cheek, but for the first time in years, it wasn't from fear. It was release. The porch swing creaked one last time, gentle, like a farewell, and Frank closed his eyes, finally at peace with the life that remained.